We've seen situations where people have bought a property thinking they could sever it, only find out they couldn't. And there's simple tests to do that, but clearly this was a situation where that wasn't done. Very costly mistake. They can show you what you can build, but not necessarily is it going to be feasible? Is it going to make you money? And can you get the financing for that? Welcome, everyone, and good evening. My name is Ed Frezza, and I'll be your host tonight in our webinar, Feasibility. We are hosting these webinars on a regular basis, so if you're not able to attend the entire webinar, rest assured that we will be recording this and making it available, as well as there are going to be other similar webinars that we're hosting. Again, the purpose of these webinars is to provide education and an insight into the way that these purpose-built rentals are being analyzed. And there's a tremendous interest in this since the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, had introduced Bill 23, which had allowed an expansion of development in Ontario, specifically here in Toronto, to permit the conversion from single family into triplexes in the province of Ontario, but from single family to fourplexes and even sixplexes here in Toronto. More specifically, there are 9 wards where you can actually build sixplexes as of right. In other words, taking a single family home, knocking it down, and building a sixplex. So this has caused a lot of attention, a lot of interest, and of course, that it all depends on 2 things. The 2 most important questions that people are asking themselves, and they're expensive because if you get it wrong, it's an expensive lesson. Number 1 is, what should I build? And this involves all sorts of questions around policy and zoning and things of that nature. And then, of course, if I can build X, does it make sense to do so? And should I do it? So those are two most expensive questions in development, and we're going to attend to that through our feasibility webinar. However, to get started, given that most of you, if not all of you, have never dealt with us before, have never met us, would like to give you a bit of an insight into who we are, who I am, and what we bring to the table. So my name, as I mentioned, is Ed Frezza. I graduated with an MBA in 1989. And at that time, the real estate market was pretty hot here in Toronto. I got in at the absolute peak of the market. I started my career in August of 1989. And then we had a recession, the Great Recession, which basically kicked in and lasted about 4 or 5 years. At that time, right out of university, I got into working for the real estate arm of a pension fund. And that gave me a really good insight as to how the quote unquote big boys analyzed real estate right across Canada, from retail to industrial and office. And that gave me a really good insight as to how to analyze, look at the key factors, not just financial, but demographically, et cetera. And I did that for, as I mentioned, 4 years until the end of the recession, where I was one of the last guys to get let go. And so at that point, since I did have my real estate license, I decided to transact in multifamily properties. But that too ended after a few years. And around 2003, I realized that this is something that I would like to actually own, not just transact for others, but to own on my own. And so I started creating my own portfolio, which I continue to own today, of multifamily. So from single family townhouses, triplexes, to the largest I have, which is 4-story, 31 units. So this has given me tremendous insight into what makes a good multifamily deal, all the way to the operational side in terms of dealing with tenants and leasing and things of that nature. Along the way, I decided that I wanted to give back, and so I've been instructing at the Toronto District School Board, TDSB, and I've been doing that since 2008, and that kind of dovetailed in what we are doing here at TESA. So what we offer is a development program geared towards Toronto's multi-family development or purpose-built apartment rentals. We have a number of apartments already existing across the skyline, but those were largely built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, largely from the impetus and the stimulus that the government introduced through the MURBs. They were a tax incentive that investors were very, very keen on investing, and that created a flurry of activity. Something like two, maybe 300,000 units were delivered because of that. And then upon the removal of that incentive, new development literally dropped. And with additional people moving to Toronto and, of course, growing quite rapidly over the decades, but with a limited supply, you can see how we've gotten into this mess that we're in right now, where there is tremendous need for housing, and we're trying to grapple in terms of how to deal with it. So what we've created is a development program that is revolving around this particular need that we have in the city of Toronto, across Canada. But since we live here in Toronto, we operate in Toronto, our program is geared for those interested in investing and developing in the 416 area code. So we offer a 6-week program, 6 consecutive Sundays, and it's at our facilities in our boardroom, and we are limited to 22 people. And if this is something that would be of interest to you, stay tuned. We'll be providing more information. But to give you an insight as to what we offer in the courses, or rather the topics that we cover, it's a 12-module program. So basically 2 modules per Sunday. So 6 times 2 is your 12 modules. We start off with module 1, which is a supply and demand module, understanding what is the history that got us to this point. Because if you don't understand your history, it's hard to understand where you're going and to understand the factors, the forces that have caused us to have the market that we have. From there, we lean into module 2, which is finance. Again, this is a very capital-intensive business, real estate investing, and more so real estate development. And so we look at the financing, but we take it one level further, and that is to look at the federal incentive, and that is the MLI Select program, the CMHC MLI Select program that has been introduced. And this is the second incentive that we've seen. The first one I mentioned is Bill 23, the provincial legislation that basically loosened up the zoning. The second impetus is the federal mandate, which is to build more homes and to facilitate the financing of these apartment dwellings through insuring loans. So CMHC is not a lender, but what they do is they insure loans to permit either the purchase of apartment buildings or the development of apartment buildings. And there's a number of different programs available. The one that really caught people's eye is CMHC MLI Select. Why? Because it promises to give funding up to 50 years amortization and with loan to cost up to 95%. So of course, one of the key elements of real estate investing, or the attractive traits of real estate investing, is the fact that you've got this tremendous leverage, or the possibility of leverage. Modules 3 and 4 get rid of get over over the dry topics of legal and tax. Most people find that dry and boring, but it's a necessity that we have to address. You don't want to go forth without understanding at least what are the bare minimum things that you need to know legally, how to set up, etc. And then in terms of tax, there's HST rebates, etc. You want to know about those. You don't need to be an expert, but you need to know what you need to find out about. Module number 5 is site selection. And number 6 is feasibility. And they kind of go hand in hand. Site selection understands what property can we build on any given site. And so not all sites are equal and not all sites are applicable. So we'll show you later on how we'll provide you actually with a free tool online that you can search for your own properties and quickly filter out those that make no sense. So a lot of you are familiar with the website realtor.ca. This is where you can sit on site and basically search by areas, by property type, bedrooms, bathrooms, things of that nature, especially if you're looking to buy a home. Well, we've created a similar tool that allows you to search for properties based on their suitability for development. And we'll give you that at the end of the presentation. Now that you've found a site that is suitable for development, how do you put the numbers together to determine, does this make financial sense? Can I get the financing I need? And it's not just a matter of profitability, but it's also a question of financeability. So a lot of people will say, yeah, I'll jump on a deal that can give me 20, 30, 40% return. But what it's of no value to me if I have to put a full $1 million and leave $1 million in the deal. So there's other metrics apart from the usual IRR and cash on cash that we look at and that are pertinent in deciding go or no go. Number 7 is design. Now that we have a site, now we want to figure out, well, how are we going to design that box that's going to fit on that site? What's going to make up that box? Is it going to be all 1 bedrooms or all 3 bedrooms or a combination? What determines that design? Number 8, now that we've got drawings, we need building permits. What's involved in getting a building permit? Now that we've got the building permit, construction. So understanding the various types of contracts, and from there we lead into the leasing of the premises. So the building itself is very much a liability because you have this massive mortgage, and without sufficient income, you'll be underwater very quickly. So your real gold, your real asset here are the tenants that you attract. And so we're building this building, unlike a custom home, for example, where you're looking at certain emotional attributes. In building a missing middle, a purpose-built apartment, you're building it with the tenant in mind, making sure that you're addressing what a tenant is looking for. So one of the key things that tenants are looking for right now, we don't need any more bachelors and 1-bedroom apartments. We've got tons of pre-construction condos that have come on the market that address that need very nicely. What we need is space to allow for growing families to grow into. So 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom apartments. And that's what we mean by stabilization. Finding the right tenant, building the building that will attract the right tenant, that will pay the highest rents, that will meet the market needs. And once we have full stabilization, full lease up, that's when we can go to CMHC and now get takeout. Basically, the financing we had to buy the land, the financing to construct, now gets replaced by one larger mortgage that is your takeout or your permanent takeout financing. And then we wrap up the last 2 modules with, okay, well, where do we go from here? You have an option of moving on your own, where we can assist you with your own signature build, very much like your signature is unique to you. We can help you in creating your own building, design build, and we're a full service development firm. Or you can participate with us in our next build. And that's the essence of the program. We take you through the whole gamut and then leave you with options of how you want to proceed based on your interest, time, and financial wherewithal. A little bit about TESA. We are, as I mentioned, a full service company, 4 different divisions. On the upper left, you'll see TESA Real Estate. So we are a brokerage firm. We do offer real estate services, but with an emphasis on land development. And as I mentioned, with an emphasis even more so on finding sites that are suitable for missing middle, purpose-built rental apartment buildings. From there, on the lower left, you've got the development arm. So this allows everything from determining the suitability of the site, the zoning, going through the drawings, engineering, architectural, all the way to the point of submitting and securing the building permit, but then also, of course, doing the construction. And we have different types of construction contracts to offer clients. Tied in with development is TESA Skeleton. And so what we've found is that because when you're adding 2 or more families together to the same building, there are much more restrictive fire safety rules, regulations. So this is where the load-bearing walls have to be made of non-combustible material. Concrete fits the bill, so does cinder block and brick, but those tend to be rather expensive. Another alternative, and one that's gaining a lot of ground and has a lot of advantages that are kind of add-on advantages, is light steel framing, or LSF for short. And what we've done is partnered with the manufacturer of LSF, so we have that ability in-house to provide that quite cost effectively. The other thing that we offer is the turnkey superstructure. And this is where we have investors or even home builders that are coming to us to say, I can take care of the inside finishing. It's just the exterior part, the foundation, putting up the walls, the roof, and enclosing it, windows and doors. If you can get me to that stage, then I can finish off the rest on my own. So we offer that service as well, where we can just bring you the superstructure, you take it from there. And in the lower right here, last but not definitely least, is the capital arm. This is where we find the money to make this all happen. As I mentioned, real estate investing is very capital intensive. Real estate development is even more so. So just to quickly take you through a number of different projects that we have worked in the past, are currently working. TESA has been in construction for the last 10 years, started in 2016. Single family homes that you can see on the left there, that's roughly 11,000 square foot custom home being built in Richmond Hill. We've done additions, extensions, top-ups. We've done office and retail build-outs. We've done gas stations. So needless to say, we know how to build things. Here's a 30,000 square foot industrial that's on the way right now. But we've pivoted since last year. We've pivoted, like many people, like many investors and many developers in Toronto, towards this missing middle. And on the left, you can see a 12-plex plus main floor retail on a major artery here in Toronto. And on the right, you can see roughly a 60-unit apartment building that we're working on as well. So we've got a whole gamut of projects on the go. We tend to work with the smaller six-plexes, 4+1s, because that's where the appetite is right now in the marketplace, meaning because it's so new, a lot of investors, both new and seasoned, are looking at the six-plex, for example, these smaller buildings, as a very quick way to test the feasibility, test their interest in this. And you certainly don't have the long timelines that's involved in larger apartment buildings. Sure, larger apartment buildings, bigger numbers, sexier to work with, to deal with, but it's the 4+1s, the 6+1s that get you in and out in, say, 18 months, 24 months tops, and allows you to de-risk market changes and to get a quick read on whether this makes sense. Here's an example of our turnkey superstructure signage and what we mean by that, where we basically provide the structure and then allow you to finish it on the inside. A little bit more on LSF. So many have never heard of LSF. So here's a quick overview of what it looks like. On the right, typical lumber construction, and that's been the mainstay of Canadian construction. Now, certainly for single family homes, and continues to be, but we're seeing, as I say, the LSF make its way into multiplexes. Now, LSF is not new. It's been around the world many years. It's even here in Canada, but it's been mostly on the commercial, industrial, retail side. Again, it's making its way into the multifamily because of its advantages over concrete and cinder block, etc., because you need those load-bearing walls. So here on the left, you see what it looks like, and you see the exterior walls as well as the roof structure starting to assemble on the second floor there. And in the middle, you've got an elevator shaft. This actually pertains to that 10,000 square foot custom home build that I showed you earlier. A little bit of a close-up on what it actually looks like. It's a rather thick steel. You cannot bend it with your hands, obviously. We use different gauges for different loads. The structure on the left is what we affectionately call it as our doghouse. It's roughly 4 feet wide, 4 feet deep, and about 6 feet high at the peak, to give you context of dimensions. But on the far right, you can see how it's screwed together. And it's screwed in such a way so you create a divot so that when you apply the drywall, it's nice and clean. It doesn't stick out. This is either produced and delivered to the client in individual sticks, very much like you would buy sticks of 2x4, comes in bundles, or we can create it in a buildable floor, basically a paneled wall, which we can then deliver on a flatbed to your site. You flip it up and it's done. So the advantage there is that you can work quickly, especially in inclement weather. So that's one of the many advantages of it. So quick overview of our firm. We've got basically 8 services that we provide. One is the financing side. 2, site acquisition. As I mentioned, we are realtors, so we can assess sites, not only find sites, but then quickly assess them as to their suitability for multifamily development. We can go through the entitlement to get you the building permit, and of course that involves putting together drawings, which is architectural, structural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. We can engage LSF design and all the way to the building permit. We can also handle the construction, the project management, and the leasing at the tail end. So who is this webinar for? Well, property owners, homeowners. Many are asking, does my home fit the bill to convert? One of the areas or one of the group of clientele that we've had that kind of surprises me are homeowners that are retiring or have retired and sit on a very sizable nest egg, but unfortunately they cannot touch that nest egg. And so there's been a lot of talk about reverse mortgages, which is it's got some drawbacks in its own right, but where we're seeing missing middle help these seniors, these retirees, is to take that asset and convert it into multiple units. Now that person can live in one unit that was custom designed for their needs, and now they've got the income from a few other units to help them. So it assists with their monthly cash flows, assists with their daily living. So that's one group that find this very attractive. Another is investors. We all know what's happened with cost pre-construction condos and custom home building and flipping and things of that nature. That worked wonders for the last 20 years. It's all come to an abrupt halt. And so a lot of those players are trying to figure out, well, what's the next reiteration of Toronto's redefining itself. We've got custom home builders. As I mentioned, they used to do quite well, but right now, nobody seems to be buying luxury homes. And also recreational properties like cottages are the ones that have been hit hardest with this downturn in the economy and in the real estate cycle. We've got realtors looking to educate themselves so they can then in turn educate clients. We've got downsizers, I mentioned. We got those who also are looking to avoid living in a condo, as I mentioned, the first topic there, the first group being people that want to stay in their home, especially if they love the neighborhood they're in, because that's where all their family and friends are. They may have lived there for 30, 40 years, and now they're forced to leave. This gives them an opportunity to stay in the same area and create positive cash flow. At the same time, create an asset they can hand down to their kids. Architects, designers, mortgage brokers, landlords. So there's a whole slew of people that are taking an interest and a closer look at what multi-family development looks like. From a developer's perspective, if you decide to move closer to this development, well, these are going to be your top 10 questions, or the top 10 questions we typically hear. They want an insight on whether their site makes financial sense, a site they already own, a site they're thinking of buying. They want return metrics. What's my debt service coverage ratio, return on investment, return on equity, internal rate of return? Want a massing design. Massing is just a fancy word for what's the box that I'm going to build on this lot look like. So we need an architect to kind of figure out what all the setbacks are, height restrictions, to figure out the optimal size, because the biggest is not always the most optimal. And then also looking for unit count. How many units are we going to have in this building? Want some clarity on the CMHC MLI financing that's available. What does it look like? How does it apply to me? They want certainty on equity and financing requirements. How much equity do I have to have, and how much net worth am I going to need to show to be able to secure this financing? They want some sort of an accurate financial analysis, an accurate pro forma, and the basis of this webinar is to get to that number crunching, and we're going to show you what that looks like from our end. Want easy to compare development options or redevelopment options for their site. So any site has more than one potential outcome. You can convert it, just add one unit, you can tear it down. There's so many different options, and so part of the feasibility analysis is to look at those options and ascribe a feasibility to each one. And if you're an investor, obviously you'll go for the one that makes the most money. But as a homeowner, you may not necessarily define feasibility by financial metrics, right? Staying in the neighborhood that you spent the last 40 years may be more important to you than making a few extra dollars. Wanting to avoid costly dead-end sites. In other words, falling in love with a site only to figure out many months later and tens of thousands of dollars later that it just is not a suitable site. It just doesn't make any sense. Want insight on instant site screening, and they want a clear, fast go, no-go decision. So these are typical questions that we get asked, and we've summarized them here so that you get a sense of what are the typical questions that you likely are asking. If you even haven't asked these questions, at least now you know what others are asking, what likely you'll be asking. So how do people typically approach this? And again, this is a relatively new endeavor for Toronto because, as I say, we haven't built purpose-built apartment buildings since the 50s, 60s, and 70s when we had that wave of stimulation from MERBs. And we're now experiencing a very similar thing, but it was just in 2022 that Bill 23 was proposed and passed in 2023. And here we are just a few years into it. And so there's still a lot of learning going on, a lot of people kind of poking and prodding, and the current economic state and certainly what's happening geopolitically down south of the border hasn't added much comfort to the whole equation, right? So a lot of people have this wait and see attitude before they jump in, so they're extra cautious. But typically, they approach it one of different ways. They will contact a residential realtor. Realtor will show a bunch of properties. They fall in love with one. We've seen situations where people have bought a property thinking they could sever it, only to find out they couldn't. And there's simple tests to do that, but clearly this was a situation where that wasn't done. Very costly mistake. Hire an architect or designer. Yes, they're capable of doing that, but they're not going to do it for free. It's going to rack up very quickly the fees. They can show you what you can build, but not necessarily is it going to be feasible? Is it going to make you money? And can you get the financing for that? This will lead to drawings, surveys, reports, and you'll just find out that for some reason there's a dead end. The problem with this is what you don't know starting out is that you need all these various professionals and studies and input collectively to give you an answer. The answer does not lie with any one individual. The answer is an amalgamation, if you will, of input from various different professionals that we have put together so that you have one point of contact, one deliverable, as opposed to all these different people that you're talking to. And there may be some, well, not maybe, there definitely will be incongruent communication between them because different professionals are making different assumptions. So this is the typical mistake that is made. You require a lot of information. You've not done this before, so you're not sure where to go, and therefore you go through the path of least resistance. Who do you know that might know something about it? They engage you in a study, and you're spending money for that very small sliver of information. What we've done in answering to this challenge that a lot of clients have shown us that this is something that's a point of pain for them, we've devised this type of feasibility study, and we were able to do so quite efficiently and rather effortlessly because rather than going out to the market to find out what we need to know to put the feasibility together, we realized we had all four elements in-house. So the real estate broker side told us what's the market value for a property, what's currently listed. We can get that because we're brokers. The financing side allowed us to find out exactly what is MLI Select, what are their requirements, how does a DSR impact the feasibility, the pro forma. From the development side, we're not just guessing what this thing is going to cost to build. We look at the site, the location. Is it on a major avenue? Does it have any obstacles to deal with? Is there a basement? Is it a part 3? Is it a part 9 of the building code? These are all factors we take into consideration to come up with the costing to build this. Whether you decide to use us or use someone else, at least you've got a much better framework of a frame of reference than just a number picked out of the sky. That's a very general rule of thumb. And then, of course, the TESA skeleton allows us to factor in costing around the LSF. All this to say that when you engage us, the feasibility study that you get is one comprehensive book, and it does 3 things. Number 1, it assesses the site for multiplex potential and defines the type of multiplex. So the 4+1 is the smallest you would do. Why? Because CMHC has one of its restrictions is it's for 5 units or more. So there's no point building a triplex, fourplex you won't be able to qualify for that financing. So it tells you what should you build, and number two, do a complete pro forma, and that looks at the zoning and entitlements. What can you build here? What does the massing look like? What does the rental rates look like? Because that's going to generate your income. And then what do the numbers tell you? And then number three is we give you a recommendation, because if we gave you the numbers on their own, if you haven't done this enough times, the numbers on their own don't really mean much. So we would then put those in context in terms of what does this mean? Is this a go or no go? What have others with experience done with this site, or would do with this site with the numbers that it's suggesting? Would they go ahead? So we give you some clarity and some comfort in proceeding or not proceeding, depending on what the feasibility suggests. So diving into what does this feasibility look like, there's essentially 5 key deliverables. Planning and policy analysis. This basically says, hey, the city is going to dictate what we can do with this property, because every parcel has a specific zoning. And the city, for planning purposes, has carved the city into zones, because it wants this part to be for living, this part for employment, this part for parks, and so on and so forth. And that's how a certain orderliness to the city comes to the forefront, by having long-term planning. So we look to the city to find out, what does the city have planned for our site, and based on the 30 plus policy layers, we're looking for hints of what we can do, or more importantly, sometimes what can't we do. And as soon as we identify a red flag, that potentially kills a deal, and we want to learn that sooner rather than later. Number two, there is development massing. And this is, as I mentioned earlier, massing, that fancy word for what's the square box, or rather 3D. What's the cube? What's the size of cube that I can put on this site? What does it look like in terms of height, width, depth? From that, then we can determine how many units, what size, what configuration, etc. Market rent study. It's not enough to say, oh, in Toronto, a 2-bedroom will rent for $2,700. It's more important that you understand what is the rent for your neighborhood and for a new unit. So one of the challenges that we have is it's very difficult to find market studies. Why? Or comparable market rents. Why? Because we can't look at condos as a comparable, and we don't have that many brand new purpose-built rental apartment buildings readily available for comparison. So there's a certain amount of interpretation analysis that is involved. Maybe in 10 years' time, it'll be a much simpler process. But right now, there's a certain element of interpretation and part science, part art in coming up with those numbers. Financial analysis. This is what everybody focuses, but you can't get to the financial analysis until you have the input from the various 3 other categories that I mentioned. And then we wrap everything up with the executive summary. So you can see roughly how many pages per section. So this easily becomes a 50, 60, 70 page report that you would get. And this is the way we handle it, so that you have a really good idea of what you're getting involved in before you commit serious dollars. So taking this a bit more in detail, the first one that I mentioned here is the planning policy and policy analysis, right? So this is the various things that we look at: is the property description, roll number and PIN, the ward neighborhood, because remember I mentioned at the very beginning that there are 9 wards of the 25 in Toronto that the councillor said, yeah, we want 6-plexes as of right. So those are kind of juicier parcels, because you can go straight to a 6-plex without having to worry about your neighbor, saying no. Conservation designation. So if you're close to a creek or a ravine, that's pretty if you got a single family home to live by those kind of natural features. But when it comes to development, those are actually restrictions. Same thing with heritage, and so on and so forth. And there's so many different policies here. My intent is not to be detailed at all, but to give you an overview of how much review that needs to be done. And that's one of the frustrating things that a lot of our clients, especially those just getting into the business, is they want a quick answer, and there is no quick answer. The quicker the answer, the less reliable the answer is. This gives you an example of our due diligence. And I don't want to spend any time, but I want to give you an idea of how detailed it is. We've redacted the address just so, to protect the client. But you can see on the lower left there, you have in red and in green what is cleared, what is not cleared. Development massing. So here you have three options. Development massing means what is a cube that we can build on this site. And the cube very much is impacted by what the city says can be built, but also by things like setbacks and density and coverage and height and things of that nature. Well, you have three options when it comes to this. One, you can say, you know what? I don't want to take any risk. I just want to build what I can build as per right. Let's do that. Well, fine. That's option one. That's just as of right development. You go straight to the building permit stage. You get a building permit. You're knocking this thing down, and before you know it, your neighbors are asking, "What are you doing?" And that's the first time they literally hear about it. Option two says, "You know what? I know what the city will allow me to build, but I need an extra foot here because that makes a big difference. I can get 2-bedroom units instead of 1-bedroom units, or if I go an extra foot higher, and I can put a basement that has more height to it or more natural light." So there's these restrictive elements that if we could just get a little bit more and ask the city for a little bit more, we would be able to get a better project. And this is where we sit down with the architect, etc., and find out, well, is it worth it? So we know what it costs to go for that committee of adjustment for that variance, and we compare that with what are the benefits. We're not just going to ask for the sake of asking. We're going to do a calculated analysis to say if it's going to cost us a few more months and 10 extra grand or whatever, what's the possible outcome and is it worth it? And so things like severance even fall into option two. And this is where I'd say 95% of our clients fall into this category, where they realize it makes sense to spend money to make money. Option three is where you're really blowing the doors off this and really saying, you know what, city, I don't care what you've got planned. I've got much bigger, grander ideas. I'm willing to take a year, 2 years plus, and a lot of money to push the envelope. This is not typically what smaller investors tackle. So this is a very unique option. We're happy to discuss this with you, but option two by far is where most of clients, not just our clients, but I think people building these multifamily developments in Toronto they sit in option number two. This gives you an example on the left of what this massing looks like. So again, you've got in green a lot, and we're building the purple as the main building, and we're optimizing the site by putting a garden suite, or also known as a laneway, housing if the back of the property abuts a laneway. But this is a way to get extra square footage and therefore more rent. And the idea is, what size should it each be and where should it be located? And in terms of where should it be located on the lot relative to the lot lines, you've got the site plan, and that's the diagram you see on the right. Again, the purple or the blue is your main houseplex, the main building, and that is governed by certain restrictions, setbacks, front, rear, etc. And then also the garden suite. Is it going to be a single story? Is it going to be 2 stories? That's going to factor the placement of that garden suite on that lot. As you can appreciate, if you make one larger, the other has to be smaller. So there is no one thing you can build. There's almost an infinite number of size configurations that you can build on this property. The idea is to find which one not only makes the most sense financially, but then also which one makes the most sense from a living perspective. Meaning, let's say if it just happened to turn out that the most profitable was to have a garden suite of only 100 square feet on 2 levels. Well, that's just not livable. You can't live in that. You wouldn't be able to lease it out. So that's why we have to, on the one hand, look at the profitability, but at the other hand, we also have to figure out, well, what is livable? And then second to that is to find out where we're building this, what is there a need for? Are we close to a subway where we could probably get away with smaller units? Or are we far from transit where this is likely going to be a family 3-bedroom unit? So we have to cater to that kind of clientele, because obviously we want to get tenants that and lease very quickly. So we want to ensure success in that matter. So this is a matrix that comes up. And here it'll give you an idea of, I'll take the middle one because that's the one that made the most sense, but you can see the suite depth and the suite, by suite we mean garden suite. So the garden suite would have a 21.3 depth, it would have a footprint of 528 square feet per floor. You multiply that by 2 for the main and second, that's 1,057. 1292 is the max you can build. So the option number 1, T1 there, you can see it's 1291.7. That is a scenario where we're optimizing the size of the garden suite, which we're not doing here in this case. You're seeing the depth is 71.5 feet. And then we go, 71.5 feet for the main building. And that footprint is 1652. And the GFA, the gross floor area above grade, is 4957, right? So we would take 3 floors times 1652. That gives you the 4957. We do not include the basement. So this is starting to give you an idea of how you look at these sites. What could you possibly put on there? And now we're starting to get some square footages. Why is that important? Well, twofold. Number one, if you know how many square feet you have, you now know how much it's going to cost. If this building is almost 5,000 square feet, we can calculate fairly accurately what it's going to cost to build. But the second part of the equation is, if we know how big a floor plate we have, we can now decide the 1652 that we have there for the main footprint. That would make a very attractive 3-bedroom apartment, maybe too large. Maybe now we're going to look at splitting in half. We'll split it in half. It's about 825 square feet. Do we have to split it in half? Well, no, we could split it into a third and 2/3. So maybe now we're building 600 and 1,000 square feet, 600 square foot 1-bedroom and 1,000 square foot 3-bedroom. So these are the combinations and the iterations that are going through our heads to try and figure out what makes the most sense given the location, given the lot size, and the constraints that we have to work with. Market rent study. Again, I mentioned that a building on its own, vacant, is a liability. What really adds value to the building is the tenants. Why? Because they're paying rent. And the more rent they pay, the more profitable the building will be. Well, how do we get them to pay more rent? Well, we're going to listen to what tenants like. We're going to listen to what tenants covet in space. So this comes forward or comes forth in the market rent study, because it's not just plugging a number saying, yeah, all 2 bedrooms, yeah, we'll get $2,700, $2,800. No, the idea is to do a micro study of that neighborhood and of that sub-neighborhood to find out who lives in this area, what's their household income, what is their education, what do they drive, what do they tend to prefer. All that information is available. And by looking at that information, we're able to discern what is the likely tenant, what's their profile, how many people, what's their rent that they're willing to pay. And this gives you a quick overview. Again, I purposely picked a bunch of samples just to give you an idea of the depth of the market analysis that we do and that you should be doing if you're doing this on your own or with somebody else. On the left one, you can see local development and growth drivers for that area. Rental, supply considerations. The neighborhood, so 32% in this case were renter share immediate zone, 95% were stock built before 1990. 25% of the residents were aged 36 to 44. So this is the kind of stuff that we look at to try and really understand who lives here, who wants to live here, what are they willing to pay. And then on the far right, we do kind of a sensitivity analysis where we don't just come up with one number, but we say, this is a number we think is the right number, but what if we go a little bit higher? What if we go a little bit lower? And what do those numbers look like if we plug those numbers into the forma? Now we get to the financial analysis, and this is what most clients just zero in right away without having gone to those first 3 sections. But here we're going to take the gross revenue. And where we get that from? Well, because we know how many square feet and how many units we have, and we know what the market rent is, here's our gross revenue. From that, we're going to extract or subtract the operating expenses. But wait, this is not built yet. Well, this is where CMHC is going to help us, because we're going to them for funding or for the insurance, that we can then take that certificate of insurance they give us, the COI, to now go to lenders who will gladly lend to us, because It's essentially zero risk, backed by the Canadian government. So they have, because they have tremendous databases, they have a really good idea of what heat, hydro, water, tax, insurance, mortgage, property management, all those factors should typically be for an apartment building. And so we use those numbers, and this is how we generate the expenses. Soft costs and hard costs. This comes from our development side. Having done so many developments, so many builds, we know pretty accurately what the soft costs that are expected to be incurred, and then correspondingly, what are the hard costs? Hard costs means labor and materials. The soft costs are all the engineering reports, drawings, architectural fees, city fees, development charges. All those things are your soft costs. Now we take the financing modeling into play. Remember, there's three different financing pillars. One, you have to buy the land. How does that financing look like? Who's a typical financing or lender in that case? Number two, you've got to build this thing. Well, there now is a totally different set of lenders with different requirements. And then three, likely you're going to go with the CMHC, MLI Select, or even a standard takeout. And what does that look like? From that, we derive what is the capital requirement. What it costs minus what you can lend, the balance is what you have to put into the deal. And then we use financial metrics like 10 years, 5-year, 10-year cash flows and ROIs and all those good things that I alluded to earlier. And these are some of the line items that you'll get in a typical analysis. I'm not going to read all of them, but you can see that it's quite detailed. You've got the budget detail, the project budget, and then an equity waterfall. So, capital stacks, where does all the money come from? How much is equity? How much is financing? Where does that all come from? So at this point, I'm going to stop here, and we're going to actually hop on to the financial pro forma. And this is what I want to do is, rather than showing you static slides, I want to show you or share with you an actual analysis where it's live, meaning I can change one number and we can immediately see the impact of what that does to the overall numbers. So I think this is going to be a lot more interesting, a lot more educational to go through one of these analyses rather than, so I'm going to have to hit stop share here. Okay, so if we could just blow that up a bit. Okay, we're good. So here you're seeing kind of behind the scene, if you will. So this is not what the clients receive, but this is our kind of workhorse, if you will, where we kind of plug numbers in and out. You can see there's a bunch of tabs and quite detailed, which is not the intent of the webinar. The intent is to understand the complexity of these projects, not to be taken lightly because of the fact there's so much money at stake, and there's so many little elements that can throw things off. And so what I'm hoping to show you, rather than tell you, but show you through this analysis is the impact that certain numbers have and the level of detail that goes into this kind of analysis that you should be expecting of yourself if you're doing this yourself, or if you're engaging somebody. So we'll start at the upper left, and here we've actually taken this analysis from a client that we worked with, and so that's why on the street address we've redacted that. But here we have a 6+1, and it made sense for 6+1. Why? Well, we went through the zoning and the planning, and also from the massing, and that suggested a 6+1. For the purpose of this analysis, we're saying September 1st is going to be our start date, and we're going to have 6 months. How does that 6 months come along? Well, we're going on the premise that we're not really seeking much in the way of minor variances, and so this will be fairly simple to push through. When I say simple, you'd say, well, why does it take 6 months? Well, it's the city of Toronto, and they're still trying to improve their track record in getting things moving. They're improving, but it's still not where many would like it to be. So factor 6 months to get the building permits, which pushes us to April of next year, which is actually good timing because we don't want to be breaking ground and building in the winter months. Productivity and quality goes down. So springtime was a perfect time to start. You can start with the demolition, the hoarding, the site prep, And if we're giving ourselves 12 months to build this, that means we'll be done by March of 2028. So 16 plus 12, that's 18 months from start to finish. To the finish meaning stabilization, where we have it fully leased, people are living in it, there's grass outside, etc. And then after that, we're going to say, well, from April 1st of 2028, we're assuming we're not going to sell it, but we're going to assume we have a 5-year hold, and then we'll sell it at that point. So really, we're not from start to end, we have 18 months plus 60 months is 78 months that we're going to look at this. And we're going to look at it in two ways. What if we were to sell it at stabilization, meaning as soon as we got it fully leased and it's completed? And then we'll also look at it, well, what if we held it for 5 years? Why the difference? Because increasingly you'll find that a lot of these deals, there's not enough juice in it for it to make sense for you to just to build it and sell it. Number one, we also don't have a very frothy market, shall we say. The market is still quite tepid. It's lukewarm. It's not buzzing like it was. So our analysis to say, yeah, if you can sell it after you built it and make a nice profit, sure, why not? But why not have plan B also factored in, that you might have to hold this for a period of time? And we're saying 5 years, but you might only need to hold on to it for 3 years. So the numbers basically address to, well, what happens in 2 years' time once you have the US elections? Let's say if there's more calmer heads prevailing, what if we have fewer wars in the world? What if the market starts taking off again? Your cap rates will change, your rental rates will change. So this is why we're giving ourselves the opportunity to look at all different angles and to sit down with the client and then have the client say, well, what if this happens? What if this happens? And this very much becomes a living, breathing tool rather than the static pages that I showed you earlier on. From here, we're going to shift to the right a bit. And so here's where we're going to focus on the income, right? So we're going to have a basement, potentially in the garden suite and potentially in the main building. Sometimes we can build slab on grade. We recommend you don't do that because real estate's expensive in Toronto. And if you can get an extra floor in there, why not put it in there? At some point, we're hoping that the density and the rules will change. So it would not make sense to build on slab on grade, meaning no basement, because if at some point in the future, the city relaxes the rules and you're able to get that extra density, you've already built it in. Now it's just a matter of finishing it off. So we put that potential in there and we go through it with clients. Now, in certain developments, there is no chance of having a vacant basement. That's the only way we can get to the numbers to work. So in that case, we'd have, say, 2 units in the basement, 2 on the main floor, and 2 on the second and third floor. So it all depends from site to site, but we've structured this in such a way that it allows for flexibility. So we'll have 0 units in the 2 red, which are merely potential, but then you've got main, second, and third. On the main floor, we'll have 2 units, 2 bedrooms, 2 baths. On the second, we've got 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, 2 of them. And on the third, we also have 2 beds, 2 baths. Now, there's different ways to structure this. You can structure so you have 2 units on the main floor, 2 on the second, 2 on the third, or we can take the second and the third and put stairs in it and have each unit have 2 levels. So that kind of gives it a townhouse feel. And it makes it a little bit more unique and distinct. And there's some advantages as well from egress, having a need for fire reasons, double entry exits, things of that nature. So that's a design issue and different ways we can look at it. But in this case, we said 2 units on each floor. We've described rents. Where these rents come from? The rental study, right? So this is where the numbers come from. They're not just plucked out of the air. They are defined and backed by research and science behind those numbers. We then look at the square footage. Now the 702, that's the net leasable area. If we have, as I mentioned as I showed you in the matrix there of about, was it 1,600 square feet, 1,600 square feet roughly, that's the gross area. But that doesn't allow for things like staircases, the thickness of the walls. So even though you've got 1,600 square feet, that's not really usable. By the time you take away the walls, et cetera, you have what's called the net leasable area from the gross floor area. And that difference is called the gross up. And so you see the two numbers here. If you look at the 6,026, that's the outside square footage of the building above grade. We don't include the basement. But you can't lease that out. So then we have to factor, well, what is wasted in the walls and staircases? Because you can't live in the walls, you can't live in the staircases. So what's the space that tenants are willing to pay for? Well, this is the 5172. And this 5172 comes from adding those numbers that you see there. So you've got the 702, 1, 2, 3 times plus the 960, which is going to be your garden suite. And that's going to be on 2 floors because you have a 3-bed, 2-bath. So that's going to give you your net leasable area. And on the far right, you'll see that we have a sanity check. So you have, 2650 for 702 square feet. What does that work out per square foot? And this keeps us in check because as soon as you start hitting $4 per square foot or more, you're getting into some territory that it's not that it's not achievable, but it causes us a second look at the place to say, listen, we know we can get 4+, but it's usually in areas that are higher demand in established areas. If we find ourselves getting over $4 in an area that is not yet established, etc., this is where we have to take a second look. So this is very much a sanity check for us as it is for our clients. Now that we have the sum of $19,700 as our gross monthly rent, we now can figure out, well, how are we going to lease this? And in our analysis here, we're saying we've got a 6+1, a garden suite, and 6 units, so that's 7 units. We're going to start, because we're agents, as soon as we get to the drywall stage and we actually can walk people through the building and that they get a sense of how the apartments lay out, what amenities it might have, how high are the ceilings, can I move around, can I put my king size bed in here, etc., etc. That's when we're going to start marketing it. And we're confident that for a simple 7-unit building, we'll be able to get it fully leased by the time this building is constructed. And that gives us several months to do that. We then assume that the tenant's not going to be there for the full 5 years. The tenant's going to move over, roll over every 18 months, and we're going to incur a 1-month cost, if you will, because we're going to have to engage a real estate agent to find us a new tenant. From there, we have potential income from parking and storage locker. In this case, to keep it conservative, we're saying nothing. So now we're on the far right side, you'll see that we're growing our rents by 3%. And I believe that to be conservative for the next 7 years, which is the time period we're looking here, given that 3% is far less than what we've seen the average for the last 5, 10, 20 years in Toronto, especially with the drastic shortage we have. So we're going through a very unusual period right now of recalibration, if you will, in the Toronto marketplace, both real estate price-wise, but also in terms of rental rates. So tenants finally have the upper hand right now, but this is not likely something that is sustainable and is expected in the long term. For the expenses, we're growing that at 2%, and we have a 3% vacancy. Again, that is determined by CMHC. Talking about CMHC, you recall that I mentioned that the operating costs are very much driven by CMHC. Why? Well, he who has the gold makes the rules, and they make the rules because they're lending us the money. They're going to determine what the property management, salary, repair and maintenance, utilities, et cetera, what the guidelines are. Now, we can certainly put more, but that's going to hurt us. So we will use their guidelines. So even if you're planning on doing your own property management, saying, wait a minute, I'm not going to incur $10,319 for property management. I'm going to do it myself. They don't care. Why? Because if you default, they now have to take over the building and somebody has to be hired to property management, and they want that line item to protect themselves, and so on and so forth. Same thing with appliances and repair and capital reserves, etc. So again, they've got a tremendous amount of data right across Canada, and that's what they're drawing upon. So now you've got your expenses. From that, we're going to subtract from the EGI, the effective gross income we had up above of $229,000, and that generates your 173,707. That's the net operating income. And that's critical because that's how we value these buildings, but that's also critical in the financing that we'll get into in a bit now. If we go to the far left, yeah. So now we start looking at the capital and the financing. So you'll see here that the total amount needed is 3,411,000. Well, how is that kind of accounted for? Well, we're going to have the equity portion at 30% be 1,024,000, which means the balance is going to be in debt. So this is not for the whole project, but this is for the development side. This is for you're buying the property, you're building it. CMHC wants to see skin in the game. They want to see that you have skin in the game, that you have some sort of attachment to the outcome of this project, so that if things get scary, you're not going to walk away. You've got money tied up. And how much money? Well, we typically say about 30%. 30% of the project cost. So if you're typically buying hypothetically a lot in Toronto for $1 million and you're spending, say, close to $2 million and getting it built, you've got a roughly $3 million project. Multiply that by a third, 30%, you're at 900, call it $1 million. So that's how we start putting some meat to the bone, if you will, to find out, well, what does this project look like? How big is it? What kind of income? What kind of equity? What kind of financing can I expect? We then take that 3.4 million, you get a breakdown here of the various elements, hard, soft costs, etc. We then have the total project cost pre-interest reserve. So here you see that it's 3.2. But what we've added on top of that is, bear in mind, you're borrowing the construction money. You got to pay interest on that. You don't want to be paying monthly interest on that, because that just adds more stress and aggravation and hassle with your financial management, if you will, your cash flows. So it's easier if you just have that lumped in is one sum and just add it at the project at the top. So that's how we get to the 3.4 million. There's a lot of other stuff there, but not to bore you. We'll zero in down to the bottom. And so this is what a lot of people are trying to understand, how CMHC works. So number one, CMHC says you're going to get your CMHC based on points. Points are based on three things. Why? Because CMHC says we want to encourage development, but we really want to encourage development that is sustainable or of good for the country, basically. So we want energy efficient units, or we want units that are accessible, or we want units that are affordable. Affordable meaning certain percentage below what the market is. So if you can deliver all three or parts of those three, you get points. And based on how many points will determine whether you can get up to 50-year amortization. So that's one key of the puzzle. The other is that if you're going with MLI Select, they're going to take your cash flow and say, we're going to apply a DCR of 1.1. What does that mean? That for every dollar in mortgage obligation you have, they want to see that you've got $1.10 in NOI. So if we take the NOI and divide it by 1.1, that tells us how much of that cash flow we can actually ascribe towards mortgage debt servicing, right? So this is a bit of an explanation behind the scenes of what's happening here. There's obviously a 4% fee, 3.35% premium for this. Of course, it's not free. So they want that premium. The good thing about that is it's not paid out of pocket. It's added to your mortgage amount. So it's kind of amortized over the loan, We use the 4% interest rate. Of course, that can change with the markets. And so now we get down to the interest stuff. So the value at stabilization, you can see there is in green, 4,087,000. How do we do that? Well, we take the next year. So after 5 years, you would look at the 6th year income, bring it back and cap it at 4.25%. And that gives you 4,087,000. Divide that by the 7 units, they're roughly 583,000 per unit. The next 3 lines are interesting, and this is where things get exciting. The first number you see there, 402,896, this basically says, okay, at the very top, you told me I had to put 30% in a deal, over $1 million. but that is not for the whole duration of the hold. That means only to get things started, to show that you've got skin in the game, to get it to the point that now you can get your 100% construction financing. Once the building is built, and now that you show that strong positive cash flow, and you've got the 50-year amortization or 40-year amortization to improve your cash flows, now you're able to get a much higher loan amount, which means now you can recoup part of that million that you're in. So here you can see that of the million roughly that you had, you're getting 621 grand back to you, and you're leaving 400 grand in the deal. So this is a very long story to get to this point, I know, but this is why people are getting into this business. A lot of people say, well, why would you build this if you're not going to make a lot of money as soon as you build it? Well, the reason is that you have an opportunity to buy a cash flowing building that is going to likely appreciate a lot more than just 3%, given Toronto's history. And you're controlling that brand new asset of $4 million with basically only 10% or 400 grand on 4 million. The 955 shows what you can show your bank on the next deal on paper, meaning you've got 400 grand of your own cash in the deal, plus you've got another 500,000, 550 grand roughly in profit that you've created in this project that now can go towards your next project in terms of being your net worth, if you will, on your asset balance sheet. So now, if we go straight to the top, let's look at what some of these metrics. So in green there, the line that you see in green, the levered after 5-year hold. Remember, we're going to spend 18 months to get this thing constructed, stabilized. We're going to hold on to it for another 5 years. So 5 years plus 18, that's 78 months. After 78 months, we have a profit of 1.363 million. That is combined profit of the profit we made on building it, the income cash flow we gathered over the 60-month hold, and the profit that we hopefully upon selling it at the end of year 5. So that captures all those upsides, and that shows you a 20.07% year IRR. Now, remember how I indicated we did 2 analyses, one to say, well, what does this look like after it's completed and I just want to sell it, versus what does it look like if I hold it for 5 years? So I just showed you what it looks like after 5 years. If you go to the bottom there, you'll see 31.3%. So this is the number that you will typically see people quoting when they're marketing their project. They're looking for investors or whatnot. This is the number that typically gets quoted. Is what is the IRR upon stabilization? Now, as I promised you, this is a live model. It's a live site. So we can go to the top now where the rents are, and I want to show you just what happens if the market here in Toronto starts to take off and we start seeing higher rents. Do they have to go up by like an extra $1,000 a month to make a profit? Well, no. Look what happens. So if we take the main unit at $2,650 and we change it by simple $100 and go to $2,750. But I want you to look at the numbers above. 19% in green, 1,363, and 20% IRR. You might even want to write it down just so that you can compare. If you hit enter now, a simple $100 in one unit, not all 7 units, just in one unit, made it go up by that amount. If you increase the next one, 2,700 by 100, so there's another 50 grand. So you can see how this can start to really turn quite a windfall for the developer, for the owner. And so it's critical to use real numbers today, but also not to get bogged down in numbers today that are not really reflective of what historically Toronto has done and where we likely will be ending. One only needs to look at other more mature cities in Europe and Asia to know that this is not sustainable. The rents we typically have here are much lower than many other cities. So this is a temporary hiatus, if you will. I believe, I was born and raised in Toronto. I've seen a lot of changes. I believe this is this is a lull that we're going through right now, and that it will recover and rents will start going up again. So not only are you building a brand new building that has cash flow from day one, but you're building an asset that has a tremendous upside as rents start to recover. I will now go back to the presentation and go out of this one. And this is where we left off. So I've given you a peek into what the financial analysis looks like. And as I say, it's a living, breathing thing because it has a lot of moving parts. We do our analysis, we do what we have to do, and then we have a Zoom call with our client to explain it. And then they can chime in with any changes they might have and say, well, what if this changes? What if that changes? So this is all intended to give the client and yourself, whenever you're doing your own analysis and as you're going through this process, to get an understanding of what the project can deliver, but then what is the sensitivity to changes in interest rate or rental rates? How sensitive is your project to that on the upside, but also on the downside? So let's continue now. From financial analysis, we now provide the executive summary. So here we're basically wrapping everything up together, concluding on our findings, our recommendations, whether the site is physically and planning wise feasible to proceed forward. And we provide a recommendation, go, no go. And we offer 4 different options. Option 1 is as of right. This, again, as I mentioned, is for those that, maybe it's your first time, you don't want to take any chances. You want to do this as quickly as possible as of right. And so for that, we have a package for $24.90 plus HST. Option 2, and again, this is where the bulk of our clients go and where we would recommend that you should go if you're looking at your site. Likely, this is where you'll make the most. Is option 2, where you're saying, you know what, I know what I can build as of right, but with a minor variance, I can make a significant difference on the upside in my project. So both of these options 1 and 2 are the ones that we routinely offer. And in the bottom left there, you'll see in red that we offer it free of charge. Recall that we are brokers, so we offer this free of charge in the event that clients actually retain us as agents. Now, to clarify that, it's not actually free. We engage clients, they pay that upfront. In the event that they actually conclude a transaction with us, then we fully 100% refund them the entire amount on closing. So this way we are remunerated for our time in the event that nothing gets bought. But should something get bought, the client wins because they get this added service at no additional charge to them. So that's option 1 and option 2. Option 3, again, this is for those who have more, deeper pockets and more patience. Typically, option 3 is measured in years, not in months, in terms of getting in working with the city, and certainly a lot more money, more time, more money. Option 4 is something that we've come up with rather recently, and it's realizing that an increasing number of our clients are service professionals who have one part of the puzzle but not the others. So, for example, realtors who have clients that are interested in this, but they are not able to provide this level of detail. So what they want to do is get this financial analysis, but put their own label on it. We'll have architects, we have designers, we've got investors. So, for example, you're an investor, you have a number of partners, and you want to engage them and encourage them to invest in multifamily in Toronto development, and you want basically a reason for them to trust you. And you garner that trust. You gain that trust by showing them that you know what you're talking about, that you've done a very robust analysis of the site, and you've got some numbers and a report that backs it up. So this makes you look smart, and also creates trust and confidence with your investors, and greater chance that you're able to raise the funds that you need to put the deal together. If you're doing a joint venture or a GPLP, general partner, limited partner type of arrangement. So those are the 4 options that we offer. At this point, I can take any questions. I suspect that Caption has been answering any chats. In the interest of time, given that it's 20 after 8, I'm going to continue with part 2, and this is the treat that I mentioned to you, the gift that we're giving to you at the end. So recall that I started off by saying that the 2 questions that are most important or most costly to developers is, what can I build? And is it going to be feasible? Well, it starts with what can I build? And to find what can I build, you have to find a site first. And to find a site, it's quite elaborate and detailed. So what we've done is basically taken what's already out there, i.e. realtor.ca and other sites that offer free access, that offer the ability to search for free without having to pay for it, without having to enter all your details, etc. What you do is you enter what you're specifically looking for and outcomes, possible results. So how we've taken that model is created this website, and I'm showing you the very first page. If you go to the second tab at the top, you see tools. Tools has 3 options. You've got opportunities, and I'll show you what they look like. And when you get opportunity cards, meaning you have these cards that give you a snapshot of what an opportunity looks like with the address, how much it costs, what you could build on it. So it takes the guesswork right away. You're not doing that you're on your own. It's already spoon feeding you that. So now you can quickly focus on what area do you want to develop in, what size, what price range. The planning map says, well, let's look at it differently. Instead of giving me all sorts of these opportunity cards, let me be in control and pick that part of the city that I want to go. So you'll see a map of Toronto, and you can zero in on a certain area, and it'll show you how many current MLS listings, active MLS listings there are to select from as potential viable sites. And third is a lot check. And this is where you're saying, you know what, I don't want to search for anything. I already have a site. Could be your home, could be investment property you already own, could be something that you're looking for on your own. You would type in your address, and in 3 seconds, you'll get the full information. So let me take you this, I'll walk you through this quickly. So opportunities. So do you know how when you search for a home to buy or a condo to buy, you'll enter what area you want to be in and how many bedrooms and maybe what square footage range and how many bathrooms and other features, etc. We do the same thing. And here we would give you, here you'd have, for example, do you want everything or do you want to just look for vacant land or tear downs or infill and severance? Or you want properties that are too good to knock down, but you just want to add a few units. That would be suitable for somebody that doesn't have the full funds to go ahead and do a full development. Maybe they want to start small by just doing an addition or something of that nature, or a renovation play. Basically, you're taking something and you're going to renovate it somehow. Or, as I mentioned, everything. So you can see after the tab, there's a number. And that gives you an indication of how many active listings there are. As soon as it gets sold or terminated or expired or suspended, it gets taken off. So this site is live, meaning as soon as an MLS listing is entered on the MLS, our system quickly analyzes it and provides the opportunity card. So you can zero in on that right away, and that's one way to expedite your search, or at very least, by looking at these things, you're going to start seeing trends. What part of the city are more of these things coming up? What makes a decent deal? What typically fits on a 30 by 140 lot, as opposed to say a 25 by 120 lot? So you start getting these nuances that come with looking at a lot of different properties. And these are the investment cards that I referred to. You'll see at the very top, it's pixelated. And that's because we had to, for privacy reasons, these are not our listings. So we had to, and this is a public forum, we had to redact the address. However, when you go on our website, now you'll see that address is fully functional, fully visible. But you can see it quickly zeroes in on what's the lot dimensions. Is it, what kind of structure? What's the asking price? How long on the market? And it quickly gives you an idea of what you can do with this property. Assesses it. What's it good for? This one, it's a tear down. So at the very bottom, you'll see 2 options. At this point, you can continue just looking as long as you want, or If there's something that catches your eye, you can sign in to view the listing, or you can have one of us contact you, and either myself or Action will contact you, and we can review the deal in more detail or just provide you with some basic information. To sign in to view the listing, you will need your first name, last name, and email address. Why? So that you're not a bot. We know you're a human being, but no one will contact you. So nobody's going to be hounding you. You're free to invest as much time in looking at these opportunities as you like. But we are available should you need assistance. So this just more different types of opportunities. Yellow's a renovation play. We've got assembly candidate, a turnkey income in blue. The renovation play and power sale. So power sale is the only one that can dovetail and match with others. So you can't have a renovation play and a turnkey income at the same time, but you can't have a power sale and renovation play, or power sale and turnkey income, or those kind of matches, right? So that's the other thing that we can look for. Option 2, you remember you've got the opportunity cards. Option 2 is now you can say, well, I want to focus on just a certain part of the city. So this allows you to look at the map of Toronto, and you can see the circle in blue with the number inside shows you how many active MLS listings there are right now that meet the requirements for a multifamily development. And then this way you can zero in and become a mini expert, if you will, of just that area, and just monitor those properties in a sub-market, if you will. And this analysis that I'm referring to is, all these policy layers that I referred to earlier, like conservation and zoning and archaeological, historical. I mean, is it on a floodplain? Is it a slope? Does it have contour issues? All these different factors that can potentially negatively impact a site, and that potentially could kill the deal. And if it does, why bother wasting time presenting it? So those will not show up. And this is the third one that I mentioned. So this is what the screen looks like. You would simply start typing a Toronto address, and literally within 3 seconds, you will get the zoning, the overlays, and whether the lot sits in a six-plex ward. Totally free. And from that information, you can keep looking at more and more. We are always available to answer any questions and for you to reach out. So that truly takes me to the end of the presentation. I've got 8:30 now, so this has been a 90-minute presentation. I thank you for your time. If any of you have questions, you're certainly free to contact. I'd love to hear from you either by phone, text, email. We're happy to answer any questions or concerns you might have. Stay tuned for further webinars that we will be hosting, and also for upcoming development courses that will start in the fall, in September. So again, thank you so much for attending, for your participation, and have a good evening. We'll talk soon.